Hi, everyone. Beloved greetings from the Andalusia Mountains again. Today, I'm going to talk about the psycho-spiritual effects of the new normality on the children. And this is actually a paper that I have written to take part in a collective action organized by several doctors, scientists, and psychologists around the world. A collection of papers that are going to be submitted to the governments, explaining what is going on from different perspectives, gathering evidence of the different dimensions of harm that is coming out of all of this. So I will begin. To get a full scope of the avalanche of harm caused by the undemocratic, unscientific, unlawful, and immoral government restrictions to our children in the name of a health crisis, we must be able to examine the picture beyond the left brain consciousness. In addition to carefully scrutinizing the data and the science, we must come to see the psycho-spiritual and cultural effects of the government restrictions to the human being. My paper is going to be an invitation to dialogue, an attempt to open the door to the spiritual dimension and sanctity of the human life. I will do this by exploring how the government-imposed new normality is influencing the crucial rites of passage in the journey of a human being. From this exploration, we can begin to imagine the collateral damage on the level of humankind. Having trained with indigenous curanderos in the Amazon rainforest for 5 years, learning ancestral healing arts through the oral tradition in the ancient tradition of apprenticeship, I come from a unique perspective that fuses ancient wisdom with the psycho-spirituality of a domesticated human being of the 21st century. It is from this place of holistic vision, as well as my experience of over a decade of activism, that I aim to illuminate the implications of our current predicament. First of all, I would like to ask, what is health if it does not include the social or spiritual aspect of the human life? In the wake of an alleged health crisis, the governing scientific advisors, either by ignorance or arrogance, rejected all possible dialogue and reduced the diverse terrain of health to a war zone where the life of some people could be sacrificed on the altar of global policy. Already within this sentiment lies an important question for us to ponder. Can one ever sacrifice something which is not their own? According to the eternal principles of natural law, one can only govern that which is rightfully theirs. Hence, if the life of the individual belongs to no entity aside from themselves, clearly there exists no entity that can choose to give up their rights on their behalf. The sanctity of the human life was the very foundation on which the Nuremberg Code was based. The informed and voluntary consent of the individual must be at the heart of all medical interventions, be they experimental, preventive, diagnostic, or therapeutic. Therefore, any mandates that violate the physical integrity of a human being cannot be called medicine. It would simply be called institutional violence. The current coerced medical examinations and vaccinations are being done in the name of the greater good, when the greater good can only ever come to be by first respecting the fundamental rights of the individual, who is the inalienable element of the community. Essentially, the governments of the world have declared a war against a microorganism, and in their brute-like mentality, totally disregarded the undeniable fact that for every action, there is a reaction of similar force, and for every decision, there is a consequence. There has to be consciousness of proportionality before any drastic measures are taken. Otherwise, we are in danger of implementing a cure that is worse than the disease. One cannot restrict the movement of microorganisms without restricting life. We are, after all, biological beings made of trillions of viruses and microorganisms, which are the very building blocks of life. By trying to eliminate all ways in which our inner and outer landscapes authentically meet and communicate, we are inevitably also hindering our immune system, which depends on this exchange of environmental information. Furthermore, the immune system does not only consist of the biochemical reality, but is largely influenced by the psycho-spiritual and social well-being of the host. The modern medicine has not been able to explain intuition or premonition, near-death experiences or pre-birth memories, the placebo or the nocebo effect. But just because the material science is inept in comprehending or verifying phenomena that is metaphysical and spiritual in its nature, it does not mean that it does not exist. This is why we need to be able to take the dialogue from the scientific sphere into the spiritual. And this is where I go into the first rite of passage, conception. Many would list birth as the first rite of passage in the journey of the human life. However, in sacred lineages and indigenous cultures of the past, special emphasis is placed on conception, the actual event of creation of a new life. One would hope this intimate reunion would be left untouched by any authoritarian regulations. But posing as some kind of a parental figure with papal infallibility, different government institutions have even shared recommendations for the way in which couples should sexually interact. From face masks to glory holes, people sharing their lives and beds have been recommended to avoid touch as much as possible, even while having intercourse. How do these hygiene regulations between the man and woman affect the quality of their connection? What does this lack of true intimacy do to the energetic imprint of the incoming soul? How does this influence the cultural legacy of human procreation? The more sterile these basic rituals of human life are turned into, the more space is created for further authoritarian interventions. Will we witness a generation of humans being born who never even knew what true touch is? At such point, could we even call ourselves human anymore? I cannot help but question whether this gross government overreach is purposefully paving the way to a transhumanist world, where even the creation of life is judged by its prospective functionality and efficacy, where biology could be seen as unpredictable and dangerous, and great feats would be taken to avoid the potentially uncomfortable experience of life in the flesh. At what cost would all of this take place? There are already artificial wombs in development, and scientists exploring the possibility of cultivating embryos from the eggs of aborted human fetuses. Is the pandemic narrative, along with all of its life-saving restrictions, a mental parasite implemented into the collective consciousness in order to turn us against our own nature? Birth. The most profound initiation into a life as an individuated expression of the great mystery, with her own unique form and consciousness, is the birthing. On the one hand, we experience a painful separation from the mother. On the other hand, we emerge from the womb into the world and dive into a continuum of growth, connecting to the thread of human existence from time immemorial. The birth memories are carried in the subconscious and cellular memory for decades to come. Instead of celebrating this precious event with songs and offerings, with the family's women present and supporting the mother in her labor, the hospital policies have largely turned against the woman and her newborn. Under the guise of the pandemic, hospitals around the world are requiring the birthing mothers to use a face mask during their labor, blocking the flow of life-giving air, the most powerful ally in giving birth. Worse yet, families are also being separated in many hospitals, not even allowing the partner present in the birthing room, leaving the mother alone in the hands of complete strangers in the middle of the most significant moment of her and her child's life. Absurd dystopian images of newborn babies being wrapped in plastic are being shared around the internet. Who are the hazmat suit dressed and masked hospital workers protecting by preventing the first vital skin-to-skin contact between a mother and her baby? Is every single sacred event of our life being turned into a ritual of paranoia? What gives the hospital the right to intervene and dominate people's lives like this? Is not the hospital meant to be a healing house for those in need? Is not honoring the patient's life and dignity the ultimate Bible for any healer? Since when have the doctors and nurses become mere agents of policy, overriding all other aspects of health and life? Patients seeking healing in hypnosis or altered states of consciousness often find themselves revisiting their birth, finding a source of unhealed visceral experiences of pain stemming from a traumatic birth. Are these current hospital practices systematically hindering the beginning of life for an entire generation of children? What kind of messaging is being installed into the consciousness of a baby, a spiritually vulnerable being whose sense of security is largely formed in the first experiences of life, in the bonding experiences with the mother? Childhood. Dr. Edward Tronick created the famous still face experiment in 1975, which demonstrated the importance of nonverbal facial communication when establishing a relationship between the parent and the child. The mother's blank face was found to be far more terrifying for the baby than a sad or even angry face, perhaps as the lifeless face resembled the face of a dead person. When the mother tuned out and stopped emotionally responding to the cues of the baby, the baby started becoming very uncomfortable and ended up falling into a panic, screaming and crying in his desperate attempt to get the mother to respond again. One may naturally conclude that the effect of the face mask is absolutely devastating for the baby when it comes to forming an emotionally rich communication and secure bonding with his or her parents. It would make sense to also assume that this lack of emotional complexity in facial language could disturb the development of the child's own communication skills. Furthermore, what does this lack of visible emotional engagement cause on the psycho-spiritual level? What kind of a worldview is generated from daily exchanges with still faces? Does this steer one to rely more on words, i.e. data, than feeling? Is this yet another piece in the transhumanist puzzle, sabotaging the ways in which we bond with each other and read reality, so that we learn to lean on information instead of experience or intuition? What about the constant fear signaling in our environment? The terror assault is directed to all our senses. The constant announcements in the store speakers and schools to keep security distance teach the child that their fellow human being is dangerous. The smell of disinfectant in all public spaces penetrates deep levels of our consciousness, reminding us of the constant threat which this germ killer is fighting against. The visual guidelines and arrows on floors condition the growing child to become an obedient member of a largely automated society, where homogeneity equals safe and diversity signals danger. Since the virus is taught to lurk literally everywhere, what happens to spontaneous gestures of affection, the hugs and the high fives? How will this fear affect the friendships of the child? Will the child unconsciously learn to keep his buddies emotionally distant from him? Will the children grow up to also fear nature, since the invisible killer bug could be on the fur of the animal, on the leaf of a tree, in the water of the river? Long gone are the scenes of happy children frolicking in pools of mud. The pandemic world is one of absolute control and sterilization of life. The arbitrary and trivial rules enforced everywhere also teach the child that cognitive dissonance is a normal state of mind. The maskless people on the street are a public threat who can be fined by the police for their criminal behavior. But the people sitting outside on the restaurant terraces without a mask pose no threat to anyone. Walking outside in the night, when there are less people on the streets than during the day, is forbidden in the name of biosecurity. For the same reason, also all tiny ma and pa shops are closed, but enormous shopping malls and supermarkets with thousands of people squirming everywhere like ants in their nests are totally COVID-proof. The gigantic temples of capitalism are considered an essential activity for a human being, but going to church to practice one's faith is not. One is not supposed to question any of these logical fallacies. Moreover, questioning these things is actually wrong according to the norms of the society, the new normality. Everyone simply must obey the dictates of the state, whether they make sense or not. whether they are harmful to our well-being or not. As a result of this mind-numbing programming, the child falls into a perpetual state of confusion and learns to follow rather than think. Above the many qualities of our mental dimension, our minds are most of all incredibly malleable. However, the neuroplasticity of our brains is largely wasted when our minds are deprived of the stimulus of an organic human life. Exercising our creativity, communicating with freedom, and solving problems. If the environment in schools and social places are turned into places of consumption rather than expression of our human nature, the children's minds become saturated with useless pieces of data and images. We need freedom of expression and thought in order to learn how to connect dots, create, imagine, draw conclusions, and discover truth. Along with the implementation of new normality, truth too has been sterilized out of life. Coming into adulthood. Traditionally, adolescence was the beginning of freedom. That's when one was first allowed to go to festivals, school discos, and travel with their friends. I dread to think of the world the teenagers of today are having to live in. What happens to campfires and first kisses, playing hide and seek in abandoned houses, and staying up way too late? The rite of passage of transitioning from a child into an adult is all about getting to have more freedom as well as responsibility. Learning how to navigate this change is quickly stifled by the authoritarian state. For with overt restrictions, the adolescent has to either suffocate his natural yearning to liberate himself from the parental force, or rebel against it with dire consequences. If breathing without a mask is considered a crime in the era of new normality, how fragile and rule-abiding are these kids forced to become? Are these the ultimate willing slaves in the making? And those whose nature is not to conform, what kind of discrimination or persecution would they experience? Free-spirited individuals have always risked being bullied by the masses, but the pressure to conform to the group is far greater in the COVID world. As the self-image of the teenager is also in a profound transition, I can only imagine how the virus narrative is negatively influencing that. Since one is taught day and night to cover their face and keep their distance, will it only lead to more neurosis and psychological conditions, self-hatred and insecurity? How can these kids feel natural within their own skin when one has been deemed a walking biohazard, a living burden on society? Diseased until proven healthy? What does the everyday life of a teenager of the pandemic era look like? Distant learning at home or in sanitized cubicles in school, and the rest of the day staring at screens, sharing memes and emojis on the Snapchat? What would even be considered normal or natural behavior anymore? Washing and sanitizing one's hands continuously would have definitely been categorized as hypochondria or obsessive compulsive disorder in the past. Now, this is socially required and even rewarded behavior. What about romance and relationships? How does anyone do that if most social gatherings are restricted or denied? How can anyone feel comfortable to be inviting someone for a date in an environment which reeks of surveillance? Are these teenagers having to grow up in a society which does not recognize anyone's right to privacy? What about the dreams and future plans? With the economy crashing down at a catastrophic pace, and most entrepreneurs and small businesses being ruthlessly destroyed, what hope is there for the adolescents? What awaits them? A life as a cryptocurrency creating biological machine plugged into their smart home in the smart city, monitored and controlled 24/7, socially credited or punished based on how well they follow the government dictates, whatever they may be. Perhaps there will be many more new pandemics. Perhaps they will start the climate lockdowns. When creativity is replaced by screens, when humanity is replaced by machines, what happens to our culture? What kind of adults are we expecting to raise with this dystopian reality? When will the fear end and life begin? If we do not seriously change our collective course, a bleak future awaits. Thank you for listening. I send you so much love. To support my work, please visit hennamaria.community.